Here's 2017. I'm a Mandarin beginner stumbling his way through Beijing with no idea what anyone is saying, and I throw my phone to the ground, angry at Duolingo, like all my learning had gone to waste. But then I went to Taiwan, and while I still sucked, something was different. The words sounded clearer. More of it made sense to me, and it was closer to Cantonese. How come? Maybe because I went to Beijing first, maybe my Mandarin got better. That's why it was easier. But it wasn't because of that. So why was it actually easier? Well, my team and I looked all over the internet for an answer, but there was nothing. So we spent days doing in-depth research on the differences between Taiwanese Mandarin and mainland Chinese Mandarin and boiled it down to 5 key reasons. And so if you're learning Mandarin, this will be helpful for you, especially if you're learning Mandarin and have a Cantonese background. But why should you listen to me? Well, now that I can speak the language, my team and I focus on helping Cantonese speakers around the world improve their Cantonese while also learning Mandarin. We've helped over 600 people, and hopefully today we can help you too. Now, before we get things going, I want to define what easier even means. Because Mandarin and Cantonese are ranked as the hardest languages in the world to learn. The FSI actually categorized them as level 5 difficulty, meaning hardest language. But the FSI also makes a very, very clear distinction for English speakers. And that's because a language's difficulty is determined by how close or how far it is from a language that you already speak. Because if I were to make this list for people in China, well, Korean, Japanese, and Cantonese would be closer to level 1. And that's why I always say if you're a Cantonese speaker learning Mandarin using tools made for people who only speak English, you're gonna have a bad time. But now, going back to it, if easier is defined by how close it is to a language you already speak, then for me, this would mean that Taiwanese Mandarin is closer to any existing language I already speak, meaning English, French, or Cantonese. Cool? Now that we're on the same page about what easier means, let's actually get into it. Now, I want to start by getting the 2 obvious answers out of the way, because this is the real deal and I don't want to not address it, okay? First obvious answer, it's the obvious thing. Maybe it's because of the simplified and traditional script. Taiwan uses traditional Chinese, Hong Kong uses traditional Chinese, mainland uses simplified Chinese, so maybe it's easier because of that. No. Okay, first off, this is from a learner's perspective, someone learning who can't read or write Chinese, so traditional simplified is not really relevant to this argument. They can't read either, right? On top of that, traditional simplified Chinese are really just fonts. Anyone good at Chinese can read both, and it won't have an impact on how you actually speak. And so everyone's goal is to speak, so it comes down to, okay, well, which one is easier to speak? Which one will get people speaking faster? Now, the second obvious answer actually ties into the last reason, which is the main argument my mainland friends want to hear before they throw pitchforks at me. So I'll keep it for then. Okay, please watch till the end, mainland friends. Okay, but for now, let's get into the 5 main reasons why Taiwanese Mandarin is actually easy to learn. Now, the easiest answer, and frankly, the weakest point in my opinion that we're going to start with is word choice. Taiwanese Mandarin uses more everyday words that sound closer to what Cantonese people use. Think about how British people call an apartment a flat. Is an Australian who also calls it a flat going to have an easier time surviving in America or the UK? The UK, because there's more similar words. And so there are numerous words in Taiwanese Mandarin pronunciation that are closer to Cantonese. And this surprised me. Let's go through a quick list of them from useless to most useful words. Let's look at some examples. Cantonese, tomato. 番茄, Taiwanese Mandarin, 番茄. Mainland Mandarin, 西红柿. Pen, Cantonese, 圆珠笔. Taiwanese Mandarin, 圆子笔. Mainland Mandarin, 圆珠笔. Notice how the Taiwanese Mandarin one has the exact same characters as the Cantonese Mandarin one. It's because it's the same word. Air conditioning, Cantonese, 冷氣. Taiwanese Mandarin, 冷氣. Mainland Mandarin, 空調. Notice again, Taiwanese Mandarin, same as Cantonese Mandarin. Chinese grammar, Cantonese, 中文文法. Taiwanese Mandarin, 中文文法. Mainland Mandarin, 中文語法. Notice how Cantonese and Taiwanese Mandarin are similar once again. Week, Cantonese, 星期一,禮拜一. Taiwanese Mandarin, 星期一,禮拜一. Mainland Mandarin, 星期一,周一. So note here that mainland Mandarin commonly uses 周, meaning for week. Now I still use 周 in Taiwanese Mandarin as well, but that's more common for like more formal cases rather than just casually. Whereas in mainland Mandarin, you might hear 周 just casually. 周一, these are all synonyms of the word week. Hour, Cantonese, 钟头. Taiwanese Mandarin, 小时, 钟头. Mainland Mandarin, 小时. This one really surprised me because the first time I ever heard my girlfriend say 钟头 to her family, I was like, what? I was like, that sounds like 钟头. I was like, I know right away. I was like, I didn't know people said that. And then I heard her family say it, and then I heard people in Taiwan say it, and I was like, wow, I did not know they used the word 钟头 as well. I thought it was always 小时, like when we learned mainland Mandarin. Garbage, Cantonese, 垃圾. Taiwanese Mandarin, 垃圾. Mainland Mandarin, 垃圾. This is interesting because they're all actually the exact same characters, but the Taiwanese Mandarin pronounces it 垃圾, which sounds closer to Cantonese. The actual ideal would be if it was like 垃圾, something like that. But 垃圾 does sound closer. Like if you close your eyes and someone said 垃圾 or 垃圾, or with the right context, if you only knew Cantonese, you could probably figure out that 垃圾 means garbage, but 垃圾, you can't really figure that out. Then on top of that, the expression for to throw out garbage. In Cantonese, 抌垃圾, 掉垃圾. In Taiwanese Mandarin, 丢垃圾. Mainland Mandarin, 扔垃圾. Now, if you bring in the Mainland Mandarin, there's no way someone who has never heard Mandarin in their life hear that and be like, oh, that means throw out the trash, 掉垃圾, and know what that means with the right context. Now, before the Mainland fans get all riled up, there are some words in Mainland Chinese Mandarin that aren't in Taiwanese Mandarin that are more similar to Cantonese, like these ones. For example, avocado, Cantonese, 牛油果. Mainland Mandarin, 牛油果. Taiwanese Mandarin, 鳄梨. Pineapple, Cantonese, 菠萝. Mainland Mandarin, 菠萝. Taiwanese Mandarin, 凤梨. Period pad, Cantonese, 卫生巾. Mainland Mandarin, 卫生巾. Taiwanese Mandarin, 卫生棉. App, Cantonese, 云锦. Mainland Mandarin, 软件. Taiwanese Mandarin, 软体. Notice how it's the exact same characters between Cantonese and Mainland Mandarin, which is why I said it's a weak point and the first point that I want to get out of the way. But one more thing to note is that from an ABC learner perspective, a lot of the words that Mainland Chinese Mandarin has similar to Cantonese, an ABC wouldn't know anyway. Like period pad. The average ABC doesn't know the word period pad in Cantonese anyway, and so it's not a benefit if it's similar to Cantonese there. The word for app, 软件, right? The average ABC does not know the Cantonese word for app, they just call it an app. Even in China, they also call it APP. So that's why I brought up this point for learners, right? It's more helpful to learn Taiwanese Mandarin in that sense. Now, I know I have some Guangzhou fans being like, Sheldon, you backstabbing traitor. So you're saying it's easier to learn there in Taiwan than in our Guangzhou, where the native language is Cantonese? You're telling me it's closer in Taiwan than in our Guangzhou? How can you put the entire mainland into one Mandarin? Huh? What about Xiamen, Chongqing, or the southern parts? You think we're all Beijing? Dishonor to your family. Look, guys, I promise I'll cover this in point number 5. Just please stick with me until then, okay? But now let's get into point number 2. Pronunciation. Now, the next is the legitimate one, because now we're going to get into legitimate pronunciation differences between Taiwanese Mandarin and Mainland Mandarin. So right away, Mainland Mandarin has a lot of what we call retroflex sounds. Now, this is not a pronunciation lesson, so we won't get too deep into what that means, but basically, that just means like words that are pronounced with the tongue curled back towards you through your mouth, right? These include words in Chinese like zhi, chi, shi, and the infamous Mandarin R sound, which is really hard. Now, Cantonese has no retroflex consonants, meaning no sounds like that, so the Taiwanese softer pronunciation is actually easier for Cantonese speakers to mimic and understand. So let's look at some sample words and how they be pronounced in Taiwanese Mandarin versus Cantonese, and you can see the similarity. So for example, Cantonese, si. Taiwanese Mandarin, si. Mainland Mandarin, shi. Cantonese, qi dou. Taiwanese Mandarin, ci dao. Mainland Mandarin, chi dao. Cantonese, ji dou. Taiwanese Mandarin, zi dao. Mainland Mandarin, zhi dao. So we see right away that Taiwanese Mandarin is a lot closer to the Cantonese in terms of sound, which makes it a lot easier for Cantonese speakers to pronounce it. Now, with that being said, the ZH, CH, and SH sounds are actually normally doable for most learners. But where most learners struggle with is that dreaded R sound in Mandarin. Ren, rang, re. Now, I spent ages trying to get that R sound in Mandarin because in Cantonese, most R sounds just become a Y. Those characters are yan, yang, yeet. There was no R sound in Cantonese, no R sound in Cantonese. And at that time when I was trying to learn Mandarin, I actually had a tutor, and it was so frustrating because we spent an entire lesson on just fixing my R sound. And I just wanted to move on. Couldn't speak Mandarin yet, but she felt like it was way more important to get my R sound fixed in Mandarin than for me to learn how to speak Mandarin, which, by the way, completely killed all motivation I had for the languages. Like, it's not fun going to like 10 lessons and you still can't converse even a little bit. All you can do is say, oh, I can say the R sound now. So I was saying 人. For example, 很多人在这里. She wanted me to say 很多人在这儿. I was so annoyed and demotivated after spending an entire lesson on one pronunciation. And I was mad at her for not letting me move on and for her saying pronunciation is everything. Because I thought it was more important to speak. I still couldn't speak. But in my mind, I was like, I spent, all that money on the tutor to just get the pronunciation. At least I got that down. But you know what I heard when I landed in Taiwan? 你们几个人? That's also how my girlfriend talks to her family. That's how her family talks in return. That's how a bunch of people in Taiwan talk. And okay, mainland friends, I know you're thinking this happens in Fujian and Xiamen too, as well as in other southern places like Chongqing. Before you get mad at me, like I said, I'll cover you guys in the end. But look, if these people can get around just fine in the Chinese-speaking world without a perfect R, I would have preferred to spend my hour learning how to speak instead of focusing on a perfect R. Because once you can speak it, you can spend all the time in the world fixing your accent. Like, they say focus on pronunciation, but that's like to make sure you're understood. If people understand you, which they understand the L, then move on. Because it's not that hard to fix an accent once you're fluent. Like, if you really want. Like, would it be impossible for me to adopt the British accent now? Absolutely not. I like to drink some water now. Easy. So we know the R sound in Taiwanese Mandarin is easier. On top of that, the general ZH, CH, SH sounds, those are also easier. So pronunciation is easier for Cantonese speakers. But look, if you're not a Cantonese speaker watching this, you're probably wondering, okay, like where is it easier for people who can't speak Cantonese then? Well, let's get into one of the most annoying and hardest things about Mandarin. And this is where, in my opinion, to be honest, Taiwanese Mandarin makes it a lot easier than mainland Mandarin. Tones and stresses. So as learners, we spend forever trying to get the tones right. Then on top of that, we have to memorize which word is that tone. Like, this is the actual hardest part, by the way. Like, I might remember that the word for table is 桌子, right? But I'm like, which tone is it? Is it 桌子? 桌子. I can't remember. This is actually the hardest part, not the tones. Native speakers, you guys don't realize it because you guys haven't learned the language before, but the hardest part for learners is remembering what the given tone for a word is. It's easy to forget. So let's get into the actual tones now and how Taiwanese Mandarin makes it easier for Cantonese speakers as well as for just people who can't speak Cantonese. And so we'll separate this into 3 subcategories. Number 1, how Taiwanese Mandarin tones resemble Cantonese ones more. Number 2, how Taiwanese Mandarin makes tone memorization easier for both English and Cantonese speakers. And number 3, a rule that makes memorizing tones a lot faster for Cantonese speakers. So let's start with how Taiwanese Mandarin tones resembles Cantonese more. So here is a picture of the pitch contour of Mandarin in Beijing versus in Taipei. So the main differences to note here are actually 3 factors. Tone 1 is a pitch lower for Taiwanese people. Tone 2 doesn't go as high, and neither does tone 3 on the rebound, the uptick. That's actually the key one. Now, in my How Cantonese Speakers Can Easily Master Mandarin Tone video, I talk about how the Mandarin tone 3 is not actually pronounced the way it's shown. They teach you it's like, whoa, like up and down, but in reality, people say it as whoa, especially when they talk really fast. And so the Mandarin tone 3 really closely resembles the Cantonese tone 4, which, by the way, most heritage Cantonese learners have no idea what Cantonese tones are, but it's basically the down tone. Like, think about the word ngao, right? It's not ngao, like the word for cow. It's not ngao, right? It's ngao. That's it, ngao, right? It's a down tone. Ngao. So watch that video if you need more context, but basically the Mandarin tone 3, they teach you as an up and down thing, which is it's not, but it's actually the exact same as your Cantonese tone 4, ngao, which you've been saying all your life. So if you're a Cantonese speaker, that should make tones a lot easier for you. Watch that video for more. Anyway, moving forward is, now one thing I didn't fully mention in that video is that some people do actually pronounce it as an up and down, right? There's a reason they teach it like that, and it's because it exists. The main thing I want to show you in that video is that if you say it as a down tone, which is easier for Cantonese speakers, people will still register it as a tone 3. And so what we see in that pitch contour graph is that in places like Taiwan, their tone 3 is actually closer to a pure down tone, which makes it even easier. The graph shows that Taiwanese tone 3 is even closer to the Cantonese tone 4 than the Beijing one because, as you can see, it has even less of an uptick than the Beijing one. Naturally, this makes it more intuitive for Cantonese speakers since it's closer to the Cantonese tone 4. And by the way, if you're a Cantonese speaker struggling with Mandarin tones, make sure you watch that video or just get my free guide down below and it'll be helpful. And by the way, Cantonese speakers, I know you see there's an uptick on the chart. Remember, you don't need an uptick, okay? Just say it the same way you say your Cantonese tone 4. Ngao, wo. When people speak fast, they don't do an uptick, okay? People will register that down tone, wo, as tone 3. So that's where tones of Taiwanese Mandarin can more closely resemble Cantonese ones. But that one's kind of a weak point, right? It's not the strongest point. Let's get to the real stuff now. How does Taiwanese Mandarin make tone memorization easier for both English and Cantonese speakers? So a distinctive difference between Taiwanese Mandarin and mainland Mandarin is that Taiwanese Mandarin rarely uses what's called the qingsheng or the neutral tone, whereas mainland Mandarin does this a lot. So first off, Sheldon, like, what the hell is a neutral tone? Well, in the mainland, many common words have an unstressed second syllable. For example, 先生,漂亮,东西. That second word is light and toneless. So they call it neutral tone. But actually, all those words, all those characters actually do have a tone, right? It should be 先生,漂亮,东西. it actually does have a tone. It's just when it's together like that, it's what we call the neutral tone in mainland Chinese Mandarin. So like I don't say its tone in mainland Chinese Mandarin, but in Taiwan, speakers tend to keep the original tone for these syllables. So it goes 先生漂亮东西. Now this actually is something that my team and I have found to make things easier not only for Cantonese learners, but all learners in general. Let's start with all learners in general. The simple answer, how it helps? Well, it's one less thing to memorize as well as reinforced memorization. So what does that mean exactly? Well, the fact that a learner 1 doesn't have to memorize another rule, which is like the neutral tone on the second character, for some of these words is a lot easier already. But add that on to the fact that now the words actually help you memorize. As I said, a very common issue that learners struggle with is they forget what tone a word has. It's the most common issue. I know what the word is, but I don't remember which tone it is. Well, say you forget what the tone west is, right? But you know the word for thing because you say that a lot more in Mandarin, right? It's muscle memory. Let's look at an example. The word 东西 or 东西 in mainland Mandarin consists of 东, which is east, and xi, which is west. Say you forget what the tone is for the word west, because it's very common, right? It's very possible to forget what the tone of the word is. But you remember the word for thing, right? You remember how it's pronounced, and you know that that second word is the character for west. I know it sounds absurd to a native speaker, but that's actually what happens for learners. We might forget an individual character's tone, but we remember how the word as a whole sounds with other characters in it, and so we use that to help us remember, right? That's actually what learners do. So now in mainland Chinese Mandarin, it won't reinforce and remind what tone it is because it's a neutral tone, right? 东西, 东西. Oh shoot, it's a neutral tone. So which tone is it? Is it she? Is it xi? Is it si, 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 si? I don't remember. Okay. I remember that it's in the word thing. 东西. Oh crap! It's a neutral tone. I don't know. Whereas someone who's learning Taiwanese Mandarin, 东西, 东西, 东西. Okay, it's tone 1. 西边, west side. 往西走, go towards the west. Because I remember, 东西. Yeah, it's tone 1. 东西. Okay. 往西走. Native speakers, I know you're rolling your eyes right now thinking this is nothing, but you guys haven't learned the language before. Just like how I don't know what you struggle with when learning English. You don't know where learners struggle with Chinese. And so from a Chinese learner's perspective, I swear this is actually one of the hardest parts of learning Chinese. And the more what my team calls memory anchor points we have, which means things that help anchor something into our memory, the easier it is. And so this helps us anchor it. 东西, okay, now I remember what she is because I know 东西 is thing. We say thing a lot more than we say west, right? And so it helps us remember it a lot more. It gives us an extra tool to look through our memory bank for when we forget what tone a given character is. So now on top of that, now for Cantonese speakers specifically, Cantonese generally pronounce words with a full tone as well. We don't use neutral tone in Cantonese. For example, that word 东西 would be 东西. 东西, it's not 东西, it's 东西. We don't have a neutral tone in Cantonese, which makes it a lot more consistent with Taiwanese Mandarin. So let's look at the same sentence read in Taiwanese Mandarin versus mainland Mandarin versus Cantonese. The same sentence. To Cantonese ABCs out there, this will sound a bit weird because I'm reading a sentence that's in Mandarin structure in Cantonese. That's why it'll sound weird, okay? So, let me read it out loud in Cantonese. 先生,我要去買漂亮的東西. Now let's say it in Taiwanese Mandarin. 先生,我要去買漂亮的東西. Now let's read it in mainland Chinese Mandarin. 先生,我要去買漂亮的東西. Very minor, I admit, but the syllable by syllable rhythm and cadence of Taiwanese Mandarin, 东西, 东西, is much closer to Cantonese as a whole, which makes it more intuitive. So now let's move on to the next point, which is where we'll make this language super easy for Cantonese speakers. Cantonese speakers don't need to memorize as much when learning Mandarin tones if it's Taiwanese Mandarin. But why is that? One of the distinct differences between Taiwanese Mandarin and mainland Mandarin are different tones for certain words. They're very subtle, like how Canadians pronounce sorry as sorry, while Americans say sorry. By the way, while we're on that, yes, I'm Canadian, and no, we don't say a boot. So no one's gonna have any difficulty understanding these tone differences. Like a Taiwanese person doesn't really have that much difficulty being understood in mainland China, and on the flip side, well, it depends where they're from, mainland China, but generally, they don't have that much trouble being understood in Taiwan as well. Depends if they're from if they're ultra Beifang, then there could be some trouble, but generally there isn't that much trouble. Even then, there's not that much trouble. You know what I mean? It's like they can figure it out. But these tone differences actually make a difference in how easy it is to learn the language. Why is that? Well, if you haven't watched it yet, we have a training on how Cantonese speakers never need to memorize Mandarin tones, and the reason for that is because of what we call tone mapping. Now, if you want to see that training, the link is down below in the description box below. But anyway, it suggests that depending on what tone the word is in Cantonese, we can predict what the Mandarin tone will be. So for example, if it's a say high flat tone in Cantonese, sam for 3, it will be the high flat tone in Mandarin, san, about 90% of the time. And like I mentioned, one of the hardest parts for learners is memorizing what tone a given word is, right? You native speakers have been speaking Mandarin all your life. It's second nature. We haven't, but we've been speaking Cantonese all our life. And so we might not know the tone numbers in Cantonese because Cantonese education for ABCs is terrible, but we know that 3 is pronounced sa, not sa. And with that knowledge, we can predict what the Mandarin tone will be. And so what that means is a learner doesn't need to memorize what tone a given Mandarin word is now. They just reference what they already know in Cantonese. Now here's an example where Taiwanese Mandarin helps with that. So the tone change rule suggests that when we have a down tone in Cantonese, we have an up tone in Mandarin. This is about 92.8% accurate. While with Taiwanese Mandarin, we can say 93. Here's an example with some common words. So in Cantonese, the word for week, sengke. Sengke. K goes down tone. Sengke. Taiwanese Mandarin. Xingqi. Xingqi. Mainland Mandarin. Xingqi. Xingqi. We see here that when it goes down in Cantonese, K. In Taiwanese Mandarin, it goes up, therefore following the rule. Whereas in Mainland Mandarin, it stays. It's a tone 1, which doesn't follow the rule. Here's another example. Cantonese flat tones become Mandarin 4 tones about 90% of the time. With Taiwanese Mandarin, we could probably say about 90.2. For example, in Cantonese, 引高, the word for research. In Taiwanese Mandarin, 研究. Mainland Mandarin, 研究. So we see in both Taiwanese Mandarin and Mainland Mandarin, they both follow the rule from before, which is that when it goes down in Cantonese, it goes up in Mandarin. They both follow the tone change rule there, but you see that the Taiwanese Mandarin follows the next tone change rule, which is that when it's flat in Cantonese, it becomes a tone 4 in Mandarin. 高 became 就. This rule is actually right about 90% of the time, so Taiwanese Mandarin gives it an extra, 0.1% inconsistency, which is a lot. It's a lot because, like I said, when you're in the moment speaking, it's very common to forget what the tone of a given word is. And so if you just channel your Cantonese in that moment, be like, okay, 引高, gao. Okay, gao is tone 3, it's flat. Okay, so that means it has to be 引高, 研究. Okay, cool. Again, native speakers might be rolling your eyes, but trust me, we learners have a very hard time remembering what tone a given word is. Any advantage is an advantage. We haven't been saying these words all our lives, right? Ask a native speaker what tone a specific word is. They're not going to just say the number because they don't know, because they haven't memorized it themselves, right? What they're going to do is they're going to say the word out loud. Okay, shuo, shuo, shuo. Okay, oh, it's tone 1. They're going to say it out loud from muscle memory, then deduce the tone from that. So this tool gives Cantonese speakers the ability to do the same without decades of muscle memory that native Mandarin speakers have. Because we've been saying these Cantonese words all our life, right? Sam, sam, sam. Okay, oh, I know it's high flat tone. I know it has to be the high flat tone in Mandarin. And so all this makes the language closer to Cantonese and therefore easier for a Cantonese speaker to express themselves and bring their Cantonese train of thought over to Mandarin. Because remember, the closer the language is to the one you already speak, the easier it is. And now we're at the last point. I'm sure a lot of my mainland friends are super, super mad right now. You guys are fuming. I feel it. What about Xiamen? Huh? We speak very similar to Taiwan there. Why don't you Xiamen Mandarin is the easiest, huh? You think we're all just Beijing, Huayin, huh? Oh yeah, by the way, I also have to mention, okay, Huayin is also very challenging. And one of the things I hate is when they teach that as the Mandarin that you have to learn. Like I remember when I was doing like Pimsleur when I first started learning Mandarin, and they kept making me say idiar. And it was so challenging and confusing because I heard most people, even the mainland, say itian. Which to add on to that real quick right now while I have you, not everywhere in mainland China uses Huayin, but there's certain words that reinforce the R. For example, like Ihuar. Whether you're from like Shanghai or wherever you are, very commonly people, they will still say Ihuar with the R sound. Whereas people in Taiwan will say, well, Yihui, or Dahui. Anyway, if someone or some app is teaching you Mandarin and they're forcing that Huayin, that R sound onto you, run, okay? There is literally no benefit to learning it. And I'll tell you why. Everyone understands Mandarin without that R sound, but not everyone understands Mandarin with the R sound. So it makes it harder for you to learn, but also makes it harder for everyone to understand. But anyway, let's go back and I want to address the angry mainland fans right now. Yes, I know mainland China is a big place, and how can I just generalize, right? Fujian, right? Chongqing, Chengdu, Guangzhou, all the things I mentioned, the no retroflex sound. These are things that are specific to Southern Chinese, right? Which we'll find across all the southern places. Why did I just generalize and say everything is like the north? But that's the problem. Mainland China is a really big place. Because the hardest thing about learning Mandarin in mainland China is the fact that it's a big place with like a million different dialects. So when you go to mainland China, there's 2 problems for a Mandarin learner, okay? Different dialects, then different accents. So Let's look at different dialects first. One of the first things you'll realize when you get to mainland China as a language learner is that not everyone speaks Mandarin, or not everyone speaks it fluently. But I remember I was in Guangzhou with my girlfriend talking to a security guard in Mandarin trying to find my hotel. I asked him like, I showed him the map. I was like, oh, do you know what this is? Then I left the conversation equally as confused as I went in. Was he speaking Cantonese? I was like, nope. And it wasn't Mandarin either. See, what's important to understand is that in the history of Chinese people as a whole, most of the time, they weren't speaking Mandarin. And so what I realized I spent a lot of time doing when I first started learning Mandarin, and I went to a trip to mainland China, was I spent a lot of time figuring out if they were even responding to me in Mandarin. And the thing about Chinese is that no matter the dialect, a couple words sound just similar enough that you question if it's your listening skills that are bad or if they're just not speaking Mandarin. Let's say you didn't know both Cantonese and Mandarin and they said like, yao bin or zhou bin. Oh, well, that sounds similar enough to 左边. Is it that my listening skills were bad? 早. Oh, okay. Did I just, maybe I'm just stupid. Especially when you're just starting off learning, it's really easy to think that. And the thing about Chinese people as well is they're very confident and bold. So they generally won't acknowledge the fact that they know you can't understand, especially if you look Chinese like me. Like this security guard, like first off, I speak Mandarin. I speak Cantonese. We're in Guangzhou. Like I speak the languages of this place, but he's so confident and bold. He just explains to me in his dialect and expects me to understand. He doesn't say like,对不起，我的普通话不好. If you don't get it, it's on you. And so I'm used to it now, in mainland China, and I'm good at telling if they're speaking Mandarin or not now. Because, I can speak Mandarin now, right? But if you took me back to 2017 and that guy was talking to me, I'd be pulling out my dictionary trying to figure out what they said, right? Punishing myself for my weak listening skills when in reality, I had no possible hope of understanding that security guard. Now, I've never had this problem ever in my life in Taiwan, not even once. And even if you do, you get accustomed to Taiwanese after a bit. Right? There's not that many other dialects, and it's easy to tell when it's Taiwanese, and you can just tune it out. But in the mainland, when you're just starting off learning, it's genuinely hard to tell if you're the stupid one or if it's just a different language. Then on top of that, any big city you go to will have people from all over the mainland. And so that security guard, who I had no idea what he was saying, probably from Hebei or somewhere in the north. That guy was in Guangzhou. And so to all my friends in the mainland who are from the south, absolutely. Any southern place will be easier to understand Mandarin for sure. It'll be almost as easy as Taiwan. Like most of these things that apply to what makes Taiwan easier will apply to most parts in the south. But, see, Guangzhou Mandarin is easy, but in Guangzhou, you have people from Beijing, you have people from Shanxi, Zhejiang, Dongbei. And so I know not everyone who watches me is trying to learn Chinese. Some of you are fluent too, and just like these videos, and in that case, thank you. But the analogy I'll give you is this. Imagine you're learning American English, and then there's an Aussie guy that pops up, an Irish guy, a British guy, a Texas guy, and an Indian guy, a Singaporean guy, and they're all around you. And they don't have issues understanding each other because they're obviously native in English, but for you, you're like, what the hell's going on? And that's exactly how it feels sometimes in mainland China because there's so many people from everywhere with all with their own different accents, and you're just like, yo, this is overwhelming. That's why I consider mainland China hard mode of Mandarin, whereas Taiwan is easy. Taiwan is easy mode when you're first starting to learn. Overall message is you heard this video, make your own thoughts and judgment, but the most important thing is get speaking first, fix all the other stuff later. And so if you're struggling with that R sound forever, then just switch over to Taiwanese Mandarin and just add an L. And then once you get confident speaking, then be like, okay, now I'll work hard to fix it. But at least get speaking first. Because when you're on your journey to learning a language, the most important thing is momentum. And the minute you clear momentum by getting stuck on this one wall of like R, I can't pronounce this R, you're gonna get stuck forever. And then you're gonna give up. Take like an adaptive approach. Take whatever makes sense to you for you to keep going on your journey. Let's say you're learning Mandarin, right? And you're stuck on that R sound. You're like, I can't get past the R sound. Well, luckily, Taiwanese Mandarin actually pronounces it like an L, like 很多人. Okay, you know what? Let me just start pronouncing it with the L first, and I'll fix that later. Jump past that wall, get better at communicating, and then when you can communicate well, now it's probably super easy for you to fix and change your L to an R. Like, okay, just work with the coach, spend time communicating, work on that, be like, okay, 人, easy peasy lemon squeezy, right? Which is perfect now because if you're a Cantonese speaker who wants to learn to communicate in Mandarin faster and easier, watch this video right over here, it'll help you out. Otherwise, click here for a video that YouTube thinks you'll love. Thanks for watching, guys. 再见, 再见.